Hello and welcome to episode 100 of 10,000 Stitches podcast, a fortnightly podcast all about the joys of knitting. My name is Andy, and if you wanted to find me on the interwebs, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and Ravelry as Purlbug, P-U-R-L-B-U-G. You can find my blog at thepurlbug.com, and then we have the 10,000 Stitches podcast group on Ravelry. It's episode 100, that's so exciting. So, as hopefully you know if you've watched at the previous two episodes, this episode's going to be a little bit different. I'm actually not really going to be doing any knitting content today at all, and instead this episode is an Ask Me Anything. So I've had the form for submitting questions open for about more than 2 weeks now, and I've gotten a fair amount of questions, so I'm just going to go ahead and answer those questions. And some of them are, about me personally, some of them are about knitting, some of them are about the podcast, but I just thought this was a fun way to sort of, reintroduce myself and figure out what do you guys want to know about me, because I've been doing this for almost 3 years now and 100 episodes, and, a lot changes in that time. So yeah, I thought this would be fun. I am going to be recording again next week as well. So episode 101 will actually be out a week from now, and then we'll get back to all like the knitty stuff. So basically there's going to be no admin stuff in this episode, no knitting stuff at all. And yeah, hopefully that's okay. So the way that I've kind of done this is I've gone through sort of my spreadsheet of the questions that you guys have submitted, and some of them, like the same theme would come up a couple of times. So when that happened, I have sort of grouped those things together and sort of condensed the questions and tried to like distill the question that multiple different people have asked. And I've kind of actually paraphrased all the questions. So I have a note on my phone with sort of paraphrasing and like condensing the questions in it. So I will be looking at that, to kind of read off the questions. And yeah, I think that's it. Let's get into it. Let me grab a sip of water really quick. And let's get into it. Today is actually Monday, September 3rd, which is Labor Day here in the States. So I have today off of work. This episode should go up on Tuesday, September 4th. And then, like I said, there will be another episode next week. And then we'll get back sort of into the fortnightly schedule. So let's do it. And actually the first question that I have goes well at the beginning of the podcast. And this is a question that was asked by both Alchemy. Oh my gosh, I have a hair that fell on my neck. By both Alchemy and Nadira Tani. By the way, I will, 4 questions where like people gave me either a name or a username on Ravelry. I will read off who asked that question. And I apologize if I pronounce anything wrong. So, and this question was about my name, actually. So I always introduce myself as Andy, but if you are perceptive and, well, not really necessarily perceptive, but if you have actually knit my vanilla socks or even looked at the pattern that I published for vanilla socks, you might have noticed that that is not the name that is on that pattern. So my real name is actually Amanda. I started going by Andy when I was in high school, and it was just because I don't know, like Amanda just seems like this real like grown-up woman's name, and at the time I just wasn't necessarily feeling that way about myself, and so I started going by Andy. And I actually don't go by Andy as much anymore. Typically now when I introduce myself to people, I will introduce myself as Amanda. And so I kind of think of Amanda as more of like my professional grown-up name. And Andy is sort of like a name that some of my older friends call me. And it's a name that I go by on the internet, which is actually really convenient because everything I have on the internet, so like my Facebook, my Instagram, my Ravelry, everything has my name as Andy instead of Amanda. So now if you search for Amanda, none of those things come up, which is really kind of nice to keep my professional life separated from my sort of personal life. There's a very loud truck outside. Anyway, so that's that. So yes, my real name is actually Amanda, but I go by Andy on the internet. So that's first question down. Easy one. So then kind of the next question is a little bit more of a personal one, and this was asked by a decent number of people. Gamer Mom, Raven Diva, Bonner, Lisa, Crystal, Susie Q, and Stein all asked about my tattoos and sort of, what's the meaning behind them? Did they hurt? Just basically, tell us about your tattoos. So I know I've shown a couple of them off a few other times, like sporadically on the podcast, but I thought I would take you guys as much as possible through a tour of my tattoos today. And I'm actually not going to be doing it right now on camera. I've dug through some pictures and found some old pictures of my tattoos. Because for one thing, some of them are in places that are just kind of hard to show off. And for another thing, I don't really want to, especially for like the one on my chest and the ones on my shoulders and stuff, I'm actually having some problems with my skin right now, and I'm hoping you guys can't tell from the distance that you're at and the lighting, but I've never had particularly good skin, and I'm going through a phase right now where my skin is really not happy with me, and I'm not entirely sure why, but I don't really want to get too close up on any of this stuff. So we'll be using some pictures to take a tour through my tattoos. And so the very first tattoo I ever got, I got when I was 18. I think this was actually the summer after I turned 18. So it was the summer between my graduating high school and starting college. I went and got my very first tattoo, which is a very large bird on my back. And the type of bird is called a quetzal, and it's a sort of bird that is native to the rainforests of Costa Rica. And the very distinctive thing about these birds is that the male birds have this very long plumage, this beautiful emerald green plumage. And I've always really loved these birds. I've never actually, maybe I've seen one in person, or maybe I've seen like a stuffed, like taxidermied one in person, but I have just like always really loved these birds, and I thought they were super cool. And so that was the first tattoo I got. It actually runs from the sort of the top of my right shoulder all the way down to sort of my belt line. And so you should be seeing a picture of that now. That one especially is a really hard one to show off because like it is very long. But yeah, that was the first one that I ever got. And like I said, I got that between graduating high school and starting college. And then I'm not entirely sure of the chronology of all of these tattoos. That's part of the problem. So I think the next ones that I might have gotten would have been my leg tattoos, I think. This was all like really long ago. Like the bird tattoo now is like 10 years ago, right? Like that's a decently long time. So I think the next one that I got was my leg tattoos, which I know I've shown off on the podcast before, but again, hopefully there should be a picture. And if you've actually knit my vanilla socks, some of the pattern pictures for that have the bottom parts of my leg tattoos in them. But my leg tattoos are these sort of argyle stripes that run up the backs of my legs, and they go all the way from the very back of my heel up to the very top of my thigh. And they are these green and purple diamonds, and that was one that I got when I was in undergrad and just, wanted something big and bold and dramatic. There's no real meaning behind it. It was purely just for the sake of art. So yeah, so that's the ones on my legs. And then I think that probably the next one that came along is the most visible one, which is my chest tattoo. So my chest tattoo is, you can probably see it. Yeah, you can sort of see it. So it's a cross, and then there's some script across the top that says, "Give me strength." This one, I know I have it. If you're seeing a picture of it right now, that's a picture of me actually between my sophomore and junior year of undergrad. So again, this is one that I've had for quite a while, and sort of the story behind it, I think I've talked about this before, but I grew up Catholic, and so there's a story I think it's in, I don't know actually how many of the Gospels it's in, but it's a story of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. I think this was like the night before he was arrested, and basically he knows what's coming. And the whole point of the story is that he's not, like, he asks, like, if this could pass me, that would be great. Otherwise, your will be done, that kind of a thing. And so basically that's why it says, "Give me strength," is because it's more so about, like, it's stupid to ask a higher power to, like, change things just for you. And so to me, it's a much better thing to think about, like, okay, let me have the strength to get through whatever this trial is, rather than just asking to avoid the trial. So that's kind of where that one comes from, and that's what that means. And then I think maybe the next most recent one is actually the one on my arm, which you guys can maybe see. So this is just a leaf with a little ladybug on it. This is one that I got in Lincoln, Nebraska when I went there for a conference. I was like, I'm going to get a tattoo. And so I got a tattoo. And it was just sort of a spur of the moment thing. I really like ladybugs, and so again, there's no real meaning behind it. It just is a thing that I got for the sake of art. And then I think the next most recent one, which is actually one that I don't have a picture of and can't easily show you guys because it's just in a really awkward spot, is I have a unicorn on sort of the back of my neck right here. That was one that just a friend did for me. Again, unicorns don't mean anything to me. She was learning how to tattoo and needed someone to practice on, and I was like, sure. So she picked a unicorn from a book of Flash, and it actually looks really good. I actually really like it, but it's definitely not something that has any sort of meaning to me. So then I think the next one that I got would have been the most recent one that I've gotten, but like the last one that I've gotten, which again, this was when I was in grad school, so it was quite a while ago. And that is, I have a big T-Rex skull on my ribs here, and it's wearing a little top hat and a bow tie, so you guys should hopefully be seeing a picture of that. The picture you're seeing is actually not the completed tattoo. I had the rest of it shaded in after that picture, but again, it's a hard one to show. So yeah, that's what that one looks like, and that one is just, it's just fun. Like, I love dinosaurs, and I love the idea of like sort of just a silly dinosaur tattoo, and I call that one Dino Sir, you know, because he's got his little top hat and a bow tie, and there actually was supposed to be like a lot of sort of like watercolor background from it, but man, that one is the worst tattoo I've ever gotten. I'll talk about that in a minute, but yeah, so that one eventually should have a counterpart. I want to get another one on the other side, and I really want to get an octopus with a monocle and a pipe. And so that will be Doctopus and Dino Sir, and I just think that will be super cute. But that one will have to wait for a while because I need to find like a really good artist for that. In terms of like what is probably the next tattoo I'm going to get, I'm sorry, I'm kind of like sweaty, it's kind of warm in here. In terms of like what is the next tattoo I'm going to get, I think I'm actually going to get something on this shoulder, sort of like a shoulder cap. It might be like, I don't know, like a quarter sleeve or something like that. But it's going to be actually, funny enough, Monstera leaves. There's an artist that I have found. I haven't actually gone in and talked to her yet. But there's an artist I found whose style I really like in terms of doing sort of botanical stuff. And so I will probably, that I think is going to be the next thing I want to get, and I want to get it before I leave Virginia, because I've so far gotten tattoos in every single place that I've lived, and so it would, I think, you know, be good to continue that and get one before I leave here. So yeah, I guess you guys will know about that when that happens. In terms of, do they hurt, right? Like I get asked that a lot, like, you know, oh, did that hurt? It's like, of course it hurts, right? Every single tattoo I've gotten has hurt. Obviously, different ones hurt more or less depending on where they are, right? So like my memory of this one is that this one didn't hurt that bad because that's a pretty sort of like fleshy, muscly part of your body. Depending on like, so the first one I got, the bird, because that runs down the entire length of my back, parts of it hurt and parts of it didn't. And it just depends kind of like how sensitive the skin is in that area. So, right, so the bird one, sort of along here, like along sort of like below your rib cage and above sort of like the fleshy, like love handly part, that's pretty sensitive. And again, like at the bottom, sort of like at that fleshy love handly part, like that's pretty sensitive, but like up on my shoulder blade didn't hurt as much. With my chest one, actually, like the part over sort of my sternum didn't hurt as much as like when he started to get out towards like the sides. Like the closer he got to my armpits, the more that hurt, because like, again, that's just like sensitive skin. The one on my ribs hurt the entire time, right? And that was like the one that probably has been the most extreme, because like I can handle the pain of it, right? The pain is not the problem, but like eventually your body will just say like, nope, we're not doing it anymore. And that was what I really experienced with that, was like, it did not take very long to get to that point where it was like, nope, I'm done. Like I had no control over it. It wasn't just like, oh, just grit your teeth and get through it. It was like, nope, my body just completely shut down and gave up, which was really frustrating, because obviously like that limits how long you can sit in the chair. So yeah, that one was miserable, and I think anyone who has a tattoo on the ribs will tell you they're pretty miserable. The ones on my legs, like the back of the knee, hurts like anything. The back of your heel hurts like anything. Otherwise, it wasn't like too bad in terms of pain. You know, it just like those spots really hurt really bad, as you can probably expect, because they're pretty sensitive areas. So yeah, that is, I guess, the story behind my tattoos. Not a lot of them have a ton of significance because I don't necessarily believe that tattoos have to have significance. Like, even though it's like it's going on your body forever, it's kind of like it can just be fun and pretty. And to me, like, that's significance enough. And I know not everyone agrees with that, but, you know, that's kind of the way I approach it. So the next couple questions I got are sort of related to what I do for work and what I plan to do for work. So I guess first I will talk about like what it is that I actually do. So I am a physicist. I currently work at Virginia Commonwealth University here in Richmond, and I am the lab coordinator. So technically my position is as an instructor, so I'm on the teaching faculty, and what I do is I basically run all of our undergraduate teaching labs. So to answer a question by Nadia B54, what courses do I teach? Typically, I teach whatever lab courses are kind of left over after we run out of grad students to teach them. I also, every semester since I've started here, I have taught the modern physics lab, and then over the past summer, I also taught the modern physics lecture. So that's most of what I teach is mostly just lab courses, which is fine. So then some other questions. So that was that question. So then I kind of got like a couple questions that I grouped together, and these are from Margaret's Crafts, The Cramped Hand, and Ro Cassie. I know one of the questions in there was, would I ever go back and finish my PhD? So I actually was in a PhD program when I was in grad school, and then I decided that I did not want to finish my PhD, and I wound up leaving with my master's. So there was a lot of reasons at the time why I didn't want to finish my PhD, and the fact is, like, a lot of them haven't really changed, and I don't regret leaving at all, and I don't know that I would ever go back to kind of finish or get a PhD in physics at least. I may wind up eventually going back to school to study something else. Like, currently I am actually getting a post-baccalaureate certificate in statistics, and statistics is something that really interests me. So like maybe I would go back for like a master's in statistics if I needed it, but at this point I really love school. Like, I love learning. I love being in school. I'm very good at being in school. But I'm just not sure that I necessarily want to be sort of a professional student. Like, at this point, I'm much more interested in kind of getting out and getting a job and actually just like getting some experience doing things as opposed to being in school. Because it's one thing to learn things in school. It's another thing to actually learn things because you need to do them. So at this point, I don't want to say like, oh, I don't think I would ever go back for PhD in anything, but I don't think I would be unhappy if I never did. Like, I wouldn't look at it and be like, oh my gosh, I've really failed in my life. So, it's kind of like if I needed it, I would, but I have no intention to right now. So then another part of that sort of general grouping questions was, what would be my dream job and what am I planning to do after I move? So I realize those are kind of two different questions, but in a way they kind of feed into the same thing, because it's kind of like, well, what do I want to be doing? So currently I don't yet have a job for after I move in December. So in case you're new, in December I will be leaving Richmond because my partner Wesley currently lives in Alabama. So I will be leaving Richmond to move to Alabama and get a new job and, start a new life, I guess, there. So I don't yet have a job lined up, but the nice thing about where Wesley lives in Alabama is that there are lots of jobs for people like me and him, like smart science people. So I will probably be doing something related to actually doing physics. I'll probably be working in a research position in a lab, either for the government or for some defense contractor there. That is most likely what I will wind up doing, and it's just a matter of figuring out the specifics for it. So that's probably what I will wind up doing next. In terms of my dream job, I actually don't know what it would be, because I think I am just so kind of like ground level in my career that I don't know what I want to do. Like, I would have thought that what I'm doing currently would be my dream job. And of course, like, every job is going to have things that you don't like about it, but I'm finding like the things that I don't like about being in academia, at least right now and in the position I'm in, are things that are sort of like, they outweigh the positives. So like, I feel like it's kind of almost dangerous for young people to start thinking about like what is their dream job, because it's like you just don't know. Like I just don't know what I want. And so for me to like say like, oh, this, whatever like position is my dream job and I'm going to keep working until I get that. It's like you really cut yourself off from a lot of other opportunities. And, I think that you should first sort of develop your skills, and then eventually you will find the job that is right for you. But I don't think I will find that probably until I'm in my 30s or 40s. So in terms of a dream job, like, I don't know. I just want to start, like, I know right now I just want to do something different, and who knows, maybe that will lead to a job that I really like and enjoy, and maybe it won't. But it's also very important to learn what you don't want to do, right? So like maybe it will teach me what I don't want to do, and then I'll change careers again and find something that I do. Who knows? So yeah, that's sort of how I feel about work. If you want to know more about this, a lot of my ideas about this have recently been sort of shaped by a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, which I highly recommend anyone read, but especially if you're a young person, read it. It will change your life, I think. So then sort of a question related to that a little bit was a question that came from Alchemy. And this is a question about, have attitudes sort of changed regarding women in STEM fields? So STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, I think. And so I want to say traditionally, but I mean, it's still the case, right? Women are typically underrepresented in these fields. Like when you look at the percentage of the workforce that is male or female, women tend to be underrepresented. And a lot of people have sort of labeled this as a huge problem. And of course it is a problem. I don't think anymore that there are systemic causes keeping women out of STEM fields. I think that there are still some sociological issues about women going into science, including kind of how we approach women or like young girls about like being smart, right? It's too often we value being pretty over being smart. And I think that is dangerous for young women. But I mean, the same thing could be argued with young men. Like too often we value being strong over being smart. It's like, no, everyone should value being smart. But I definitely either I've been very fortunate, or perhaps this is actually how things are, but I have never really felt like this huge bias against me because I'm a woman in a STEM field. And some of that is because I don't let myself be sort of steamrolled by my male colleagues. But like I don't really get a sense of this sort of gender bias in the STEM world. Like women are valuable and we're not necessarily biased against. So I think attitudes have definitely changed. Like obviously, like you're just as likely to get a job if you're a woman as if you're a man in a STEM field. I mean, the fact is, like, there are just more men in STEM fields than women, and I don't really know why that is, but I don't think anymore that it's because there are sort of barriers to women being able to get in. I think that the real cause of problems these days is keeping women in STEM fields. Like, I think probably just as many women go into STEM fields initially as men, right? Like, as many women enter college thinking, oh, I'm going to do this, as men. But I think that there is something that keeps women from staying in those fields. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. Like, it just is a thing. But I definitely don't think that there's like a lot of bias anymore, at least from my experience, against women in STEM. Like, I think it's like if you can hold your own, because unfortunately it is a little bit of a boys' club still, just because there's more guys. But it's like if you're able to hold your own, like it's not like I don't see a lot of gender bias. Like I don't feel it. So I think it's definitely good. We should be encouraging more women to go into it, and fixing those societal issues against valuing women only for their looks and that kind of stuff. So what's the next one? Okay, so then another sort of related question, I guess, to my background in science is this was asked by S.D. Hendy? I forget what your actual name was. I only wrote down your Ravelry name. But anyway, the question boiled down to, like, do I think my physics background helps me in my knitting and my sort of, like, pattern designing? And, like, sort of, like, I think they especially referred to, like, sort of, like, spatial awareness. But I would say yes, definitely. But perhaps not necessarily in that way. I think that where my physics background has really helped me as a knitter or crafter in general is my ability to think through a problem sequentially all the way to the end, which is something that a lot of people just don't have. Like it's a skill, and it's something that physics has helped me develop. And that's not the only way to develop this skill, but it definitely is a skill which is emphasized in sort of the sciences, is you kind of take this initial problem, and you can't typically in science see all the way to the end, right? Like but that there's sort of steps that you need to take to get there. And sometimes you know ahead of time, like all the steps you have to take to solve a problem. And it's just a matter of cranking through the steps. But sometimes you don't. Sometimes you have to kind of say like, okay, well, I think this is the first step I need to take, and then I'll look at what comes out and I'll figure out the next step. And I think that is super helpful, sort of being able to think through a problem like that when it comes to knitting. Like even if I'm just following someone else's pattern, it's good to be able to sort of have the ability to look at the pattern and really kind of visualize all the steps from beginning to end rather than just blindly following what's happening. I really like to look through and be like, okay, this is why I'm doing this thing now, because this is coming later, which needs this thing, right? And that is definitely sort of in my wheelhouse for the way that I was taught to think as a physicist. And it's also obviously very helpful if you are trying to either design a pattern or kind of trying to, what's the word that I'm looking for? Create a pattern from a picture. Why is it that I can't think of what this word is? Oh my gosh. That's going to drive me nuts. Anyway, but if you're trying to sort of like recreate a pattern based purely on pictures and stuff, like that ability to sort of think through things sequentially, I think is very helpful. And I think this would be very helpful for everyone. Like I really wish more people had this skill, because I think it just would solve a lot of problems in society if more people could kind of think through their problems a little bit more analytically rather than emotionally. I think that is how it's helped me, not so much like from a sort of an engineering or like a structural component, but just like the ability to think through problems in an analytical way. Okay, so that sort of is some of that stuff. So now I think we will kind of get into some of the knitting things, and then we'll I've tried to kind of like theme things as we go along, but now I think we will move into some of the knitting sort of questions. So one of them was asked by Amy, and it was, has anyone hated a gift knit? And not that I know of. I don't think I've ever had anyone that I've gifted something to that immediately hated it, at least. Like, of course, I don't know if people actually wear the things that I give them. That would be whatever, right? But it's like, okay, well, so at worst they're indifferent about it. But like, I've never had anyone be like, oh God, I really hated that. And so that is good. I've been doing pretty well on that. Thankfully, or well, I guess part of that is because I don't knit a lot of gifts, and like the people that I do knit gifts for tend to be people who I have a sense like they would gladly receive a knitted gift. So I've been very lucky in that sort of area. And that sort of ties into a question asked by Pink Purple 11, which is a type of gift knit that's always well received. And you would think that I might say socks, because I knit a lot of socks and I have gifted a lot of socks. And I think that for some people in my life, gift socks have always been well received, right? My mom has loved all of the socks that I've gifted her. But in terms of like, in a more general sense, I think probably a safer thing to knit people is hats. I think those are pretty much always well received, as long as you have a good sense of like what colors the person likes. I think hats are pretty much always well received because it's hard for them to not fit, and everyone could always use another hat. So if you're looking for an idea for something to knit someone, go for hats. Like, I think double down on hats because they're quick and they're relatively easy and they're pretty low risk. And that's typically what I will make someone if I don't know that they would prefer something else. So yeah. Then I had, okay, so speaking of gift knits. So then this was a question which was asked by, I feel like I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but I want to say it's Maricella. Maricela, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, and Cheryl, which was basically what was the most difficult or complex project that I've ever made, which I was proud to have finished. And this is actually a gift knit. And this was, I think, long before I started the podcast. But I did a double knit scarf for my older brother as a Christmas present. And the thing is, like, most of the scarf was just basic double knitting, where it was one color on one side and the other color on the other side. Like, there wasn't a lot of design to it. But on the ends of the scarf, and I hopefully have put a picture in here, there was the tiger hawk for the Hawkeyes, which is where my older brother is doing his graduate studies. And so, obviously that part took a little bit of work, but even just knitting the entire scarf and making sure that I didn't screw up at all made that probably one of my most difficult projects relative to my skill level. And even now I probably would be challenged to, like, not screw it up, right? Because if you've ever done double knitting, you'll know that it can be easy to just, like, wind up with, like, a little blip of color in the wrong place because you didn't hold your yarn exactly right. So that was a project that I managed to not screw up, and I was very proud of it. And I have no idea if he actually wears it or not. Doesn't matter to me. Like, it's probably the most difficult project I've ever done, and I haven't done a lot of double knitting since then. But I was very proud of it, that I managed to do it perfectly without screwing it up at all. So that's probably the most, and it doesn't seem like that would be it, but that's probably the most complex and difficult project that I've ever made. So another question I got sort of related to gift knitting is, does Wesley actually enjoy the things that I make him? And this was asked by Swellmel. And yes, Wesley does actually enjoy and use the things that I make him. But again, that's because I am very particular about what I will make him. Like, I only make him things I know he will actually want and use. So, I've made him, how many pairs of socks? 4 or 5 pairs of socks now. He does wear them. Obviously not in the summer, but he does wear them in the winter when it gets cool enough to wear them. And he wears the heck out of them. Like, he is very hard on his socks, but I would rather that he wear them than not. So, he wears the socks that I make him. He wears the hats that I make him. I don't know that I would really ever try to make him, like, a sweater or something, just because, like, when you start to get into things like that, like, he doesn't wear sweaters because he's a person who gets, like, overheated very easily. So, like, I could easily make him a sweater and he would very much appreciate it, but he probably would never wear it. So I try to keep the things that I make him to things I know for sure he will wear and appreciate. So that's that. And then vaguely related to Wesley. So I had a question asked by Sue, which was, I'm pretty sure it's about the picture that I use as my Ravelry picture, which I will put on the screen, but it's me and holding up a beard in front of my face on, like, a little stick. And this is actually from, so when Wesley graduated from undergrad, his parents threw him, like, a little sort of graduation party, and this was part of it. So Wesley's mother is, like, a wizard with papercraft. She actually makes cards, and she's really, really good at it, like, amazing at it. And so this was part of what she did for the party, is she had sort of like a photo booth thing set up, and she had all these cute little props like that beard. I think there was also, like, some glasses and like different hats and stuff like that people could hold up to take these goofy pictures. So that picture was actually taken at their house before going to the thing. But that was one of the things that she made for that. And also, some of you guys might find this fun, but I will put a picture up now of Wesley and I, and this is the day of his graduation, I believe, from undergrad, right? So this was in 2013, so it was like 5 years ago now. And look at how young we are. We're like little babies in that picture. It's just, it's so crazy to look back on pictures like that and be like, wow, like, we look so different. So yeah, just a little fun thing for you guys. So another question that I got asked, which is related to Wesley, and this was actually asked anonymously, but basically, like, is marriage in the cards for the two of us? And I don't know if I've mentioned this before, but so in November of this year, Wesley and I will have been together for 7 years. So we've been together for a very long time. And obviously, like, you don't wind up together like that and moving across the country multiple times and doing all that stuff without marriage coming up. So, we have talked about getting married, but both of us sort of approach marriage in the same way, in that, like, to us, marriage is purely sort of a legal contract, and so we will only get married when it becomes more financially advantageous to us to get married versus to be not married. Because both of us work, there is not like the sort of tax breaks that would come with getting married that you might have if one person doesn't work, right? We also don't plan to have children, so there's not any issues of like guardianship of children. So for us, marriage basically doesn't, and again, we both work, so like we both have health insurance, right? So like it just, in a lot of ways, like marriage doesn't benefit us that much. And so that's why we haven't gotten married yet, and that's why we may never get married. We don't know. Like for us, like it's purely sort of a contract, and there's nothing romantic about marriage. And I know some people might disagree with that. And so until there becomes some benefit for us to enter into a long-term contract like that, it just doesn't make sense to do it. So like, yes, we've talked about marriage, but no, it may not happen anytime soon. And if it does, and this has gotten me no lack of annoyance from my mother, but if we get married, it will probably not be a big thing, because again, we view it only as sort of like a legal thing. So it will probably be something where like we just decide one day, like, okay, fine, like now we've entered into the realm where it's more beneficial for us to be married than not, and so we will go to the courthouse and just get it done, and we will probably not tell people. Like there will not be a wedding. Like it will just be like, okay, let's do this thing. So even if we did get married, probably nothing would change. We won't wear rings. I told him that if he ever gets me an engagement ring, I will beat him over the head with it. Like it's just, I have no interest in that. He has no interest in that. So like we're just not interested in it. So yeah, I realize that's like a very sort of, I don't want to say controversial, but it's not a common view on marriage, but like that's sort of the view that we both hold on marriage, which is convenient that we both kind of view it in the same way, because otherwise there would be problems. But we both feel that way about it, and it works to our benefit. Sort of a less serious question about Wesley and I group him into this because this obviously includes him. So this was asked by Zolu107, and it was basically, do I plan to get any pets? Which basically is a question like, do Wesley and I plan to get any pets anytime soon? And the answer to that is probably not. We've had pets before. So Wesley always grew up, like his entire time growing up, they had dogs. And so he's always had pets. We had a couple of pets when I was younger. Like we kept rabbits for a little while. I've kept fish before. But like, my family never really had pets that lived for a super long time. It was more so like small animals that died after a couple of years, just because they have short lifespans. But Wesley and I did actually have a pair of cats while we were living in Wisconsin. This was between the time when I left grad school and before we moved out to Richmond. We were in Wisconsin for about, well, I was there for about 7 or 8 months. Wesley was there a little bit longer, but we were working in Wisconsin. And we actually did have a pair of cats for 6 or 7 months there that we were taking care of for a friend who was out of the country. So, I have had experience with pets like that before, and I loved those cats. Like, they definitely brought a lot of joy into my life, and I really enjoyed having them. But even saying that, I don't think I would get pets again anytime soon, because pets are a lot of work and they're a big commitment. And, I don't plan to have children, right? So like, that kind of feeds into like not wanting to have pets, but like, I feel like pets, like they really kind of limit what you can do. So Wesley and I really want to be able to travel, right? And we really want to be able to just pick up and go for a weekend or something like that. And pets make it a lot harder to do that. You have to have someone who can watch them and take care of them. And like, as pets get older, sometimes like they get sick and they get, more and more health problems. This is what happened with the most recent dog that Wesley's parents had. And they actually haven't gotten another dog since then, because I think it's just like this dog, like he got sick as he got older and just required a lot of care and attention, and really sort of started to, I know this is going to sound bad, but he started to kind of negatively impact their lives. It was like, oh, well, we can't go places because we have to be home for the dog, and stuff like that. And obviously like that oversimplifies things, but it's like it did have a huge impact on their lives for a couple of years until the dog finally, I forget if the dog died or if they had to have him put down, but basically until the dog passed. And I just don't know that I'm willing to enter into a commitment like that right now. So at least for the foreseeable future, I don't see us getting pets. Even though we both kind of want them, I don't see it happening. So if I could have pets again, I probably would get cats again. I really definitely preferred cats to dogs. I've never, like, I'm not a dog person, but I definitely think I prefer cats. Although sometimes, like, I do look at people walking their dogs and I'm like, oh, it'd be kind of nice to have a dog to go on walks with me. But I definitely think I'm more of a cat person. And I liked the cats that we had. Like, they were very fun and they had very interesting personalities and all of that. But yeah, I just think in general, it's like, it's not in the cards for us. Like, we're not stable enough yet, and we don't quite kind of have the support structure. Like, we don't necessarily have, friends or family nearby who could take care of them for us. Because we did have that in Wisconsin. Like, we did have, family close by. So if we were going to leave for the weekend, someone could come feed the cats. But in Alabama, that's not really the case. So yeah, I don't think pets are in our future, at least not for a little while. So yeah, okay, so now this kind of gets into a lot more knitting stuff, right? We took a little diversion from knitting stuff, and now we're back. So this was a question, again, this was kind of a group of questions that was asked by a decent number of people that I kind of condensed down. And basically, this was asked by Shauna Stitches, Melanie, another Melanie, different Melanie, Lisa 911, Crafty PW, Rosie, Angela, Renee Rue, and the Striped Dot. All sort of ask questions related to my sort of knitting history. So kind of, I'll just talk through that, right? So I learned to knit when I was pretty young, I think. Like, I don't remember exactly. Like, that's probably how young I was. And my mom taught me, but I didn't really get into knitting until I was in grad school, right? What I really got into was crocheting. I was decent at crocheting. I learned to crochet around the same time. And I made a lot of things like pot holders and baby blankets and, like pretty basic stuff. I'm sure I made a lot of very wonky scarves. I don't actually have any of the very early things that I made or even pictures of them. I don't really have much record of anything that I knit before I was knit or crocheted, basically before I was in grad school. So some of the first things I made, I'll try and pop pictures up here, but I made some baby blankets, right? So those were some very early things that I made. What else? I made some hats. Like, I made a lot of little things at first. I made a lot of baby blankets, a lot of hats, some scarves, neck warmer kind of things. I got really into making toys for a while. Like, I did a lot of amigurumi toys for a while. So that was a thing that I really enjoyed because I kind of enjoyed the piecework of it. And it was, a little bit smaller, a little bit more portable. So yes, but basically, I didn't really get into it until I was in grad school and I was a little bit older. And by that time, I think I remembered sort of how to knit, but I basically retaught myself how to do everything. And that's really when my skills sort of exploded, was like when I started teaching myself how to do things with the help of mostly YouTube, right? Like, this would have been really hard to do without YouTube. So in terms of like, I got asked, like, what is the favorite thing I've ever made? I've talked about this before, but I have the hat that I made, which I wear all the time and really love. That's probably the most worn thing, like that's at the intersection of favorite and most worn. In terms of Wesley's favorite thing I've made, it's definitely my Happy Potamus that I made for him. That's his favorite thing I've ever made. I've liked a lot of the things that I've made recently. Like, I love, the socks that I make because they're useful. So that's, I like all of them. The ugliest thing I've ever made, there should be a picture on screen right now. This is actually, like, in terms of, like, just really ugly. This is a little squid that I made with this, like, crazy multicolored yarn. And I didn't make this to be cute. I made it to be a cat toy, actually. Like, when we had those cats, I learned that they like to play with little knitted things or crocheted things. So I crocheted this little squid thing, and I think I put like a little bell in it or something. And yeah, they loved that thing. Like, they went nuts for that thing. But boy, was it ugly. Like, that yarn, not cute at all. So yeah, that's that. I think I mentioned, right, so I do know how to crochet. In terms of other crafts I've done, like, I've dabbled a little bit into, like, embroidery. I'm not very good at that. I'm not very patient at it. I've tried to learn how to sew before. I'm not good at sewing, at least not yet. Like I just haven't had the time to develop that skill. Weaving is a thing that I'm interested in, but I haven't really ever delved into. And I've tried spinning on just like a drop spindle before and have not had terribly good success with that. But I've talked before about like I would like to get a proper spinning wheel, and I think spinning is a thing that I would actually really enjoy if I had, the equipment and the space for it, which are both just things that I don't have right now. So that's kind of waiting until probably after I move. I will look into investing in a spinning wheel and actually take up spinning. So yeah, that's a little bit of sort of my crafty history. I also got some questions about sort of dyeing and things like that. So this was sort of, again, another kind of group of questions that was asked by Mulalava. I feel like I'm not pronouncing that right, but and Knit a Little, Gojo63, and DJID, which was sort of all about like preferences. So favorite fiber to knit with and dye with. And actually, for me, that's pretty much the same, which is wool. I've only really delved into dyeing wool, and I really like knitting with wool. I, for the longest time, thought I was allergic to wool, but I think I have sensitive skin to itchy wools, but it turns out that things like merino and stuff and like just higher quality wool, I don't have a problem with. So in terms of which type of wool I really like BFL. I think BFL is probably my favorite sort of breed specific wool to knit with and to dye. Of course, the softness of merino is nice, but I really like BFL, and I find BFL to be almost as soft as merino, but I really sort of like that it's just got a little bit more, earthiness to it. Like I really like just like the BFL is just slightly more rustic than merino. So I like BFL. Sort of my favorite color, and this sort of, again, I had a question like, have my color preferences changed over time? I am really into neutrals right now, right? I used to be super into like neons and bright, crazy colors. And right now I'm I feel like in a phase of my life where I really just like simple, beautiful neutrals. And sort of like things that are simple, but have a little bit of nuance to them. Like I really am gravitating towards that kind of stuff right now. So like, and that's not what I used to like, but like that's definitely what I'm liking now. It's what I'm liking knitting with, and it's what I'm liking dyeing, is sort of these beautiful, nuanced, subtle colors. What is my favorite method of dyeing? I really like crockpot dyeing because it's just so simple and easy and just like sort of brainless. But I also really like stovetop dyeing. I've tried oven dyeing before and I'm just not crazy about it. So yeah, I would say probably crockpot and then stovetop would be my next favorite. So then I also got a question from Linda on how to dye a sweater quantity worth of yarn. And this is tricky because obviously if you're dyeing something by hand, like there's always going to be variation no matter how carefully you try to do things. And if you're, using hand dyed yarn, you should always alternate skeins if you're knitting a sweater, but you should, like you really should. So I have dyed sweater quantities worth of yarn in different ways in the past. Sometimes I dye them one skein at a time. So I think the key thing here is that you need to have a way to accurately measure your dye, right? And the way that I do that is I use little 6 milliliter syringes that I buy off of Amazon. You can get them super cheap off Amazon in like bulk packs. And I use those, and I have these big 16 ounce jugs of food coloring, and that's kind of what I take out of. But I feel like being able to accurately measure the amount of dye going into the pot is the most important thing for dyeing a sweater's quantity worth of yarn. And it doesn't really matter like how much water is in the pot. Like what matters is how much dye is in the pot. So I have done it before where I have dyed each of the skeins individually, which works fine. I've done it before where I've dyed them in batches. So like the yarn that I dyed for part of it's being used for the Viajante and part of it's being used for that Luella Cardi. So that I dyed 4 skeins total, and I dyed them in 2 batches of 2, right? So I put 2 in the pot at each time. And again, this depends on how big of a pot you have, right? I was only able to dye 2 skeins at a time because I have a big, like, 6-gallon lobster pot, which will comfortably fit 2 skeins. Before I got that, I couldn't. I could only dye 1 skein at a time. So if you have a pot big enough to let both skeins be in it and so that they're free to move around, I'd say 2 skeins at a time is probably fine. I've even dyed 3 skeins at a time, and that works fine. The tricky thing about that is just making sure that, like, you have to kind of stir it up as it's heating, right? Because you need to make sure that, like, none of the yarn kind of gets smushed to the bottom or to the side or gets, like, bunched up in, you know, like in the other yarn. Like, so you can dye 3 skeins, or maybe even 4 if you have a big enough pot, as long as you're willing to commit to getting in there and kind of giving it a little bit of a move around while it's dyeing. You know, that will work fine. So when I did the yarn for the Viajante, that green yarn, what I did was I actually mixed up all the dye ahead of time in a separate little jar. And I think it wound up being like 15 milliliters of dye or something like that. And then I used a syringe to take out the amount that I wanted for each pot. But that way I knew that, like, it was coming from the same initial stock. And so the ratios of everything was going to be the same. And I just had to make sure that I took out the correct total volume. So that's sort of, my recommendation is basically, like, obviously, like, look at what do you have. Like, do you have a big enough pot available to do all of your skeins at once? If you don't try it, right? Like, if you only have a big enough pot to put in 1 skein comfortably, only do 1 skein at a time. But it may be beneficial to mix up all of your dye stock ahead of time in sort of a common container, and that way you only need to measure out the total volume coming out of that container to go into the pot. And that just makes it a little bit easier to keep everything consistent. And then just alternate skeins, right? Like, nobody likes it, I don't like it, nobody likes it, but just do it, and that will make that alternating skeins hides a multitude of sins. So then I got another question about from Marianne about color, like color running on, like, hand dyed yarn, sort of like you know, like, color bleeding on hand dyed yarn. And some of this is just like, this is just what happens, right? Like, you can really exhaust the dye, really set it, and sometimes, like, some color will still bleed no matter what. And typically, like, this stops happening after the first couple washes. But, like, this is just a fact of life with hand dyed yarn. And the more sort of saturated the color is, the more it's going to bleed initially. And it's just like, you just can't help this. Like, it doesn't mean that you did it wrong. It just means, like, this is the way that it is. Like, this is the trade-off you have to make for, like, really saturated colors. But if you think that, like, it maybe didn't, like, if it's bleeding a lot and you think that maybe it didn't quite set right, you can always reset the dye. And basically what you do for that is you go through the process of dyeing the yarn again, but just without any dye. So, you know, you get a big pot of water on your stove, you throw in some acid, so, you know, vinegar or citric acid, whatever it is that you use. I just use vinegar, right? So throw in a nice healthy glug of vinegar, put your yarn in there, and then heat it up until it's, you know, steamy and hot. Like, don't necessarily boil it, but kind of, you know, do the same thing you would do if you were dyeing yarn. Heat it up, get it nice and hot, and then turn off the heat and let it cool down to room temperature on its own, right? Like, this is something that I find really does help, is letting things cool down all the way without rushing them. And that will really do as much as you possibly can to set the dye. Like, it still might bleed, especially if it's a really saturated color, but, like, that is a method you can use if you think, like, maybe it wasn't quite set properly in the first place, is, like, you can always reset it, and it won't hurt the yarn any, it's fine, right? So you can always do that. Again, just basically heat it up with some acid, let it cool down, rinse it, dry it. Should be fine. I got a question from Catherine about dyeing with Wilton food dye. And this goes back to something that I said in some of my dyeing tutorials, which is that when you're dyeing with food dye or Kool-Aid or whatever, basically food safe dyes, you always want to make sure that they have no sugar or artificial sweeteners in them, right? You basically want it to be just pure dye. And so she asked, like, well, all she can find is like Wilton food dye, which has sugar in it. And so basically, will that be okay? And the answer is probably. I have never dyed with that, but I know I have seen tutorials from Chemnitz, who is really great at doing dyeing tutorials, and she has dyed with like the Wilton gel food dyes before, and I know those have sugar in them, but like she's dyed with them and they've turned out okay, I'm guessing. Like the big concern with sugar is that like if you're like, obviously like you don't want to put a lot of sugar in, but like basically the sugar will get into the yarn and it can make the yarn kind of gross and it can be hard to wash out. But my guess is that if it's not very much and you do a really good job of washing the yarn, I think it should probably be okay. I would maybe test it first on like a smaller amount of yarn and then really, really wash it. Like really wash it like with soap, rinse it multiple times, and I think it should probably be okay. Like the key thing is like you just don't want sugar getting into the yarn, because it can just make it gross and then it attracts bugs, and like that's not what you want. So you want to avoid sugar as much as possible, but again, if the dye is like really concentrated, like you can maybe get away with it as long as you wash it properly. But I've never done it before. So then another question that I got was from Final Herald Mage, which was asking if I would sell yarn again, sell my hand-dyed yarn again after I move. And it's funny, Wesley and I were actually just talking about this last night, and I want to. Like, I really enjoy dyeing yarn. Some of the selling process of it I didn't always love, but I really enjoy dyeing yarn. And for me, the thing that really caused me to stop dyeing and selling yarn is partly just because my life got really crazy. I think I would like to sell yarn again because I really enjoyed doing it. And so you know, who knows? Obviously, like I will let you guys know about that. And I think even if I did start selling yarn again after I move, it probably would not be until like next summer. Like I would want to move and get really settled in at whatever my new job is before I start trying to do that again. So I wouldn't expect it to happen anytime soon, but you know, who knows? Maybe next summer things will be different and I'll be able to start selling yarn again. I don't know. Now we're getting into some of these sort of just like random kind of one-off questions. So one that I got from both Linda Shields and Push Past Me was sort of like making dreams/goals. And I don't really know if I have any of these. Like I don't really have like a lot of things where it's like, oh my gosh, like this is sort of like a real big like goal or dream project that I want to make or something like that. Like I would like to make a sweater that I actually wear a lot. Like that would be really nice. But if that never happens, like it's no big deal. So yeah, I don't really know. I guess I don't really have any. I'm trying to just sort of like be much more like spontaneous and like live in the moment with my knitting and not try and think too far ahead of things. So then another question I got was thoughts on this. So this is from Bork P, and thoughts on Colorwork. I want to do it. I can't do it. Like if you've been around for a while, you'll know that like I've tried Colorwork before. It is not something I'm naturally good at in terms of being able to like tension properly for Colorwork, and I know that I would get better with practice, but like I just don't really want to practice it right now. Like I think maybe what would be good for me in terms of Colorwork is to work some things on circular needles, because most of the knitting I do is knitting in the round, but it's on like it's like magic loop, and I don't think that lends itself particularly well to Colorwork. So I think maybe if I could find like a good hat pattern that I could knit on a pair of 16-inch circulars, or like a cowl pattern or something like that, I think that would probably be beneficial for me learning to knit Colorwork, because like I want to do it, I just am really bad at it right now. Like I'm really, really bad at it. So yeah, I want to do it, I'm not good at it. That's my thoughts on it. So then this is from Rosie Lady Knits, which was a question about knitting pet peeves and my favorite thing about knitting. So knitting pet peeves, so these both are like sort of opposite sides of the same coin, right? So my knitting pet peeve is when I have an idea for something and like I can see it in my brain, like the thing that I want to make, and I just can't make it work, right? So maybe it's that like the yarn doesn't want to behave with the project or whatever, or like I'm trying to sort of just pull something out of my head and I can't quite get it to work. Like that drives me nuts, is like when I have a vision of something and I cannot manage to make it a reality. But then on the flip side of that, my favorite thing about knitting is when everything really just comes together and produces like a beautiful final object. So you know, when the yarn and the pattern and just like everything works together, and it's just beautiful. Like the finished object is just better than you could have ever hoped it would be. Like, you know, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, kind of a thing. So it's like, you know, it's like you have the highest highs and the lowest lows, and they come from the same place. Is like, do things work together or do they not? That's definitely sort of my answer to that. Okay, so then this was from Jembula, and it was what do I do when I kind of lose the motivation or the inspiration to knit? And I find that the thing that works best for this is either to cast on something new, right? Like maybe you just need like a little bit of a palette cleanser, you just need a break from something you've been working on. So take a break, right? Cast on something new, or take a break from knitting entirely, right? Like if you've lost your knitting mojo and you honestly you can't even think of something new that you'd want to cast on to knit, it's okay, right? Just take a break, right? Take some time to read some books, watch some movies, maybe do some like crocheting if you're a knitter, or vice versa. But like, I think sometimes you just need a break. And I go through this sometimes it's just a couple of days where it's like, I just won't pick up any of my knitting for like a couple of days, and that's fine. And if it turns out to be longer, like that's fine too. Like if you honestly don't want to knit, don't knit, right? And that's totally okay to do. I think it's better to sort of listen to yourself and just say like, okay, I'm gonna do something else for a little while. And if you really, like, you'll come back to it eventually, right? Eventually you'll be back. And if you're not, then that's fine too. Like if you continue to not want to do it, that's also okay. Okay, so let's kind of do some of the last sort of random questions. I know this is getting really long, so I apologize for that. Okay, so this was a question asked by Susan, which is, why did I start podcasting? And I started podcasting, so this was, when was this? Was this before I got my job here or right after? It was right around the time, it was sort of right after we'd moved to Richmond, and I think it was maybe before I got my job here. But I basically had a lot of time on my hands because it took me a long time to find a job. And so I started watching a lot of knitting podcasts, right? Like because I didn't have anything to do during the day, in between applying for jobs, I took up knitting again. And so then I started watching a lot of knitting podcasts, and that was kind of when I first started knitting socks and stuff like that. And so I was like, oh, well, I should do that too. And I, you know, sort of the first year I did this crazy, like, I want to knit 50 pairs of socks in a year thing. And so I kind of had this like challenge. But like, I had already been on YouTube for a while before that. Like, you know, those first couple podcasts, while slightly embarrassing, are actually better than maybe would be expected if you thought that was my first time making videos on YouTube, because it definitely was not. I actually had a channel before that where I talked about fountain pens, which is another weird esoteric hobby of mine. But I used to talk about fountain pens. And so I had actually been on YouTube since, I don't know, since I was in grad school, right? So like I had already been on YouTube for quite a while before that. And so this was just sort of like exploring a different hobby of mine. And I'm glad I've done it, and I definitely feel like it has made me, it has definitely helped with my knitting. It has made me push myself and do more interesting things with my knitting that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. I've made friends. Like, I really enjoy being a part of it. But in terms of like, why did I start? Like, because I was watching a lot of them and I was like, I could do that. And it would be good, you know, it was good to kind of like help me push myself to make, you know, to try and make 50 pairs of socks in a year, you know, stuff like that. Sort of along the same lines of things that you watch, I got asked by E. Freckman, my favorite TV show / guilty pleasures. So my favorite TV show, I actually don't have a particular favorite TV show, I don't think. But I tend to like the genre of crime procedurals, right? So I like things like CSI, NCIS, some episodes of Criminal Minds I like. What else? I feel like there was others, but I really like those sort of like crime drama procedurals. I really like those. I also really like the Great British Bake Off, just because I don't know, it's kind of relaxing and it's like it's a different take on reality TV, and I really sort of like that. I like nature documentaries a lot. Like I like watching Planet Earth and stuff like that. But yeah, I like, in terms of like guilty pleasures, I really like action movies that don't have a lot of plot. Like those are some things that I really enjoy. So like, I actually just the other day went and saw the latest Mission Impossible movie. I really enjoyed that. I recently went and saw the latest Jurassic World movie. Really enjoyed that. Like I just like sort of brainless action movies with lots of explosions and maybe dinosaurs, but not a lot of dialogue. So yeah. I'm actually also reading a book which is sort of in the realm of guilty pleasures, which is the Dan Brown books. Like basically anything by Dan Brown I kind of look at like as like, so here's my thoughts on Dan Brown, right? If you take any of the books he's written individually, they're good books, but like if you have read pretty much all of his books like I have, like they're very formulaic, and but like I enjoy reading them because they're just fun. Like they're fun books to read, and if I'm kind of having like a lull in being able to like find an interesting thing to read, sometimes I'll reread a Dan Brown book because it'll kind of get me back into reading again. So I'm actually doing that right now with The Lost Symbol. Is I'm sort of rereading it because it's one of my favorites of sort of the Robert Langdon universe, and I just enjoy it, and it's a fun read, and I've actually been using it to kind of work on training myself to be able to read and knit at the same time. So yeah, so that's some guilty pleasures of mine. A question asked by Linda is, what is one of my favorite places to knit? And actually my favorite place to knit or to read or basically do anything is actually in our campus library. So if you go into the campus library and you go all the way up to the 4th floor, which is the top floor, there's a room in there which is only accessible by faculty and graduate students. You have to scan your ID card. And I really like working in that room just in general because it's quiet. Like the 4th floor is a silent floor of the library, so it's very quiet and there's lots of space, and it's like got these big huge windows everywhere, so there's lots of natural light, and I really like that room. But also in that room they have some, I'm pretty sure they're not real, but I think they're like replica Eames chairs, and they're these really super comfy leather chairs, and I like to sit in them and just knit or read a book or something, and they're right kind of along where some of the windows are, so you can look out into campus, and it's really relaxing, and it's quiet and just peaceful, and I really enjoy going there and like, you know, maybe popping in a podcast and just knitting for a while. That's probably my favorite place to knit of anywhere that's like currently accessible to me. Obviously, I'd love to be knitting like on a cruise somewhere, but you know, that's neither here nor there. This is a question from, I think it's Eisenel, which is asking sort of like, how do I wear my socks? And I'm assuming it's a she, but she was saying that like she has a hard time with like kind of getting, like being able to wear hand knit socks inside of shoes. So I wear my hand knit socks basically as my socks. Like I do have some sort of like no-show socks that I have been wearing a lot lately because it's so freaking hot. But like when it's not a zillion degrees outside, I basically just wear my socks like normal. And basically the key to this, I think, is when I go buy shoes, I try to always be wearing a pair of hand knit socks, and that just deals with any sizing issues. And so, you know, so if I go in the late afternoon, you know, when your feet are kind of the most swollen, and I'm wearing hand knit socks, and the shoes fit, then I know that they will fit. But yeah, a lot of it is just like, I don't even know that I consciously buy like size up for shoes, but I just sort of make sure that the shoes I'm wearing are roomy enough anyway. And I really don't like shoes that are tight otherwise, right? Like I like shoes that are a little bit roomier and just like give my toes a little bit of room to spread out and stuff like that. So it tends to play into the type of shoes that I would buy anyway. Is like, I like to have a little bit of room in my shoes. So yeah, I don't know if that was helpful, but I basically wear my socks as normal socks, but I make sure that I just buy shoes that will accommodate them by wearing those socks when I go to buy new shoes. This was a question asked by Chris, which was about the project bag that I actually showed off with the enamel pins on it in my last episode. He was asking where it came from. That is a bag from Target. I actually got it in their travel sort of section, you know, like where they have like the luggage, and then sometimes they have like little pouches and stuff. It actually was in there, and it was like $10. And I don't know if they still have it at Target or not, but I really like it because it has different pockets and stuff in it. The only thing I don't like about it is that some of the pockets, including one on the inside, actually are closed with Velcro, which, as we all know, Velcro plus yarn is not good. But otherwise, I really like it, and it's really nice because it will fit 200-gram balls of yarn side by side, so it's really great for bigger projects. So yeah, that's where that came from. Stacy asked me if I could have dinner with anyone alive or dead. Who would I want to have dinner with? And I actually have a really hard time answering this question. Like, I'm going to give the stupid answer, which is Wesley, because, you know, as you guys know, I don't live with him right now. So, like, that would be nice to just be able to go have dinner with him. But, like, this question's obviously meant to be sort of like a celebrity or like a famous person or historical figure. And, like, I really don't know. Like, I really can't think of who I would necessarily want to sit down for dinner with. Which would be like sort of a known person. Like, I don't tend to like really glorify like celebrities or even like scientists. Like, I know some people be like, oh, I'd really love to sit down with Einstein. It's like, I don't know if I would or not. Like, I don't really know. So like, I guess if I had to pick sort of like a famous person that I would want to, you know, spend some time with, I know this might be a little bit divisive, but it would actually probably be Barack Obama. And I don't want to talk politics with him, right? Like, politics aside, he just seems like kind of a fun and interesting guy who would be interesting to chat with. So maybe him if I had to pick someone. But I really just have a hard time picking someone because I don't know. Like, because like typically like people like that who are kind of like famous figures, it's like they're famous for one particular thing, but like it turns out like they weren't like a very nice person or something, right? Like, you hear that about like famous scientists a lot. It's like it turns out like they were kind of a jerk, or they were like super socially awkward. So it's like, well, I wouldn't want to have dinner with you. And like famous people, like celebrities, it's like, well, maybe they're interesting, but like maybe they're just a pretty face, and like maybe we'd have nothing to talk about. Like, I don't know. So it's a hard question for me to answer because I overthink the question. Rhonda asked for a plant tour because she noticed this guy sitting next to me. So I actually recorded that, so I will pop that in here. And this is basically all the plants that I have in my apartment. Okay, so these are the plants that currently live out in my kitchen and sort of living area. So here, this is a ponytail palm. It's like 2 of them that are really small. This is a bonsai that Wesley left here. I think it's like an olive tree or something. I'm basically just tasked with keeping it alive. This is a type of aloe, which has not been doing so well. I read that like when they get really tall like this, it's because they're not getting enough light, and I've moved it to a higher light area, and I don't know. I don't know what's going on with this guy. This is a sago palm, and this top set of leaves here is actually relatively recent after I repotted it. So that one is doing pretty well, and I'm pretty happy with it. This you might remember from seeing before. This is Hans, which is a type of snake plant. It's a cylindrical snake plant, and he's grown a lot. There's like a lot of new stalks in there, and the reason that the yarn is around it is because I'm trying to get them all to kind of grow upright, but who knows, that may be totally in vain. And then these two, so this one here and this one, these are both ZZ plants, which are actually related to peace lilies, and they're plants that you commonly find in like malls or something. They're not doing so hot. Like, you can maybe see the part of this one here is dying, and the same thing is happening on the other one, and I don't really know what's going on with them. I've heard that they can be, like, the weird thing is like they're relatively stable, easy to care for plants, but they can also be very fickle, so I don't really know what's going on. Maybe they need to be repotted. Then down here, this is a pothos. It's like some sort of variegated pothos, and it's just like one of these kind of classic leafy, viney plants. This is actually, I think, the plant that I've had the longest here in Richmond and managed to keep alive. So highly recommend, if you're not good with plants, start with a pothos. And then this guy, I believe, is a corn plant. Again, I think it needs to be repotted. It's one of the plants I've had a little bit longer, and so I think it probably needs some new dirt. And I'm not very good at keeping them so that the ends of the leaves don't get all brown. I don't know. Anyway, corn plant, I believe. And then this, if I had to pick a plant out of all the ones I own that is like the biggest pain in my butt, it would be this one. This is a croton. They're really beautiful. They turn these really beautiful colors, but they are also super temperamental because they're a tropical plant, so they need to be kept really, really wet, and they need a lot of sunlight. And so it is just a pain in my butt, but I'm proud of myself for keeping it alive because I had another one that I killed actually. So this one I'm pretty proud of, and we'll see how much longer it lives. So these are all the ones that live out here in my kitchen and living space. I'm going to swap them out for the ones that live in my bedroom, and I will show you guys those in just a second. So then these are all the plants that normally live in my bedroom. So we'll start with this guy. This is the biggest plant I have. This is a Dieffenbachia, which is also known as a dumb cane, and it kind of looks a little bit sad. It used to have a lot more leaves than this, and then I put it outside one night, I think to get like some water when it was raining, and then left it outside the next day when it got really hot, and like most of the leaves died. This one actually probably needs to be trimmed off, but I cut off all the dead leaves, and you can actually see there's new leaves coming in. So like it's not like it was dead, but like it lost a lot of its foliage. You can see how bare it is down on the bottom, but it's coming back, so I'm pretty pleased with this one. And then I guess my next biggest one is the Monstera, which you guys may have seen in the background of a couple of my videos lately, because I have it sitting right next to my chair. This is, I think, my most recent plant acquisition, and it's the one I'm most excited about because I love Monsteras, and yeah. So then this one is another really old one. This one I've shown you guys before. This is my orchid, which we've had bloom twice, and now I'm just kind of, you know, nourishing it so that it will hopefully grow a new stalk and bloom again. I had to put it in a bigger pot, so we'll see. And then this is a bromeliad, sort of similar to orchids. Apparently, like eventually the flower will die. So the flower died and I cut that off, but apparently new ones might grow. I don't know. I don't know what's going on with this. I just keep watering it and I figure we'll see what happens with it. And then this one, I forget what the name of this is, but it's got these kind of fuzzy leaves. I want to say it's like a pussy ear plant or something like that, but it's got these kind of fuzzy leaves, and it's, again, I don't really know what's going on with it because you can see there's a lot of sort of dead stuff in there, but like when I first got it, it was really clumped and like dense up top, and now it sort of seems to be like sort of spreading out a little bit like downwards. I don't know what's going on with it. I also think I don't remember to rotate it as much as I probably should so it can get lots of sun, but anyway, that's that. This is the first spider plant I ever got, and so this one has since produced some little spiderets, like the little things that come off of it. So this was my first attempt at repotting some of them, and this one, you know, it's not growing terribly large. But then this pot is actually full of a bunch more spiderets that I pulled off of the original one, which are growing really well. Of course, there's like 5 of them in here, which is why it looks a lot denser. And then this is some cuttings that I took off of that pothos I showed you before. I've tried before to take cuttings off of the pothos. Oh, get out of here. I've tried before to take cuttings off of the pothos and never had success in getting them to actually root, but this time it worked. So I'm pretty proud of this. And again, this is maybe like 3 or 4 different cuttings that are in the same pot, but they are definitely growing like crazy. You can see here's a little new leaf coming in. So I'm pretty excited about that. So yeah, that is all of the plants in my apartment. So yeah, that was my plant tour. And then I got another question, which I will try and keep a little bit brief, but this was a question from Diana, and it was basically just sort of any tips or suggestions I have on kind of keeping life simple, like thoughts on minimalism, stuff like that. So I don't know that I necessarily have a lot to offer on this. Like some of, I think what leads people towards minimalism is just like their own personality, right? Like I don't think minimalism is for everyone, but like I definitely have a personality which values sort of open space. And so like I prefer uncluttered surfaces. I prefer actually like plain walls. Like I prefer very minimal decorations. And so for me, this feeds very well into minimalism, right? Because this is the thing that I prefer. When I get into spaces that just have like a lot of stuff in them and a lot going on, like I don't like that. Like it just like really sets like my teeth on edge. So like that tends to lead me towards trying to reduce the amount of like things in my physical environment. So some of that is just like my personality, and if you don't have that, like that can just be a little bit harder to kind of get into it. But I think for me, I also try to just always think about things very logically, and I try to think through like what are the consequences of this, or like what is sort of like the lifetime sort of this thing. So like I try not to buy things or acquire things that like I don't actually want, which I know sounds like really simple, like duh, of course, but like people will try to give me things sometimes, and it's like, no, I don't want that thing. Like obviously I'm not rude about it, but like I've had, you know, people in my family or in Wesley's family or friends or whatever try to be like, oh, I'm trying to get rid of this thing, would you like this thing? And sometimes, you know, it might be a thing which is genuinely useful and I do want, but if it's like, I don't want that, like I don't say yes just to be polite, because like that's not being polite, that's just being a doormat, right? Like I will typically, if I don't want the thing, I'm just like, no, I don't want the thing. And they'll be like, oh, are you sure? Like it's so cool. It's like, no, I don't want it. And I think that has been a very important thing that I've been working on myself, right? Like I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but this is like a thing I've been working on myself, is just like saying no, right? Like saying no to stuff and saying no to like sort of commitments, and saying no to like experiences that I don't want to have, right? Like of course there's value in saying yes and like pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone, but I've also been trying to learn how to say no to things that like I don't want to do, right? Like I don't know if I talked about this, but so my first Christmas that I was working at VCU, I got invited to a Christmas party at one of the faculty members' houses, and I really didn't want to go, but I said yes. Like I said yes because I felt like it was the thing I was supposed to do. And you know, sometimes this will happen where like then the thing comes and you're actually like, okay, it wasn't so bad. No, it was as bad as I thought it was going to be. Like it was a really long drive to this person's house. And it was a really late night, and I felt really out of place because I just, you know, didn't want to be there, and it was pretty bad. And it was as bad as I thought it was going to be. And so then the next year I just said, well, the next year I think they asked me about it like in person. They kind of caught me off guard, and I was smart enough to say like, you know what, let me check my calendar and get back to you. Like that's how I've been learning sometimes with these things. It's like, let me check. So then you don't have to say no to their face, but you can be like, oh, you know, no, I'm not free that night. It's kind of like this slow no. But I think like, and I don't regret not going, right? Like I think sometimes like you have to just learn to say no. And of course, like, yes, there's a risk you might miss out on something, but like I think it's really valuable to say no to things. And if you want to kind of read a book that I think is really valuable about this, try reading Essentialism, which is a book I know I've recommended before, but it's a book that I think is super helpful about like learning to say no to things. And I think that is something which is really important, and that like everyone needs to learn how to do it. So that's actually all the questions. I'm sorry again that this got really long. Hopefully I can maybe edit it down just a little bit. But yeah, thanks to everyone who's hung out for the past 100 episodes. I don't know if we'll see another 100 more, given the rate at which I've been, you know, sort of recording like fortnightly. That would be another like almost 4 years. So like, I don't know if another 100 is going to happen, but who the heck knows? So yeah, we'll see. But I did want to thank everyone who submitted a question. Again, thank everyone who's been, you know, watching, and yeah, we'll get back to like the regular sort of knitting stuff again next week. But before we go, I wanted to announce the winners of the 2K giveaway. And I actually have 2 winners, and part of the prize is going to be a skein of yarn. And oh my gosh, this is just so not showing up properly. I'll try and get a picture of this because like the color is way more beautiful than it's appearing right now, but it's this yarn that I dyed up that is this really beautiful sort of gold green color, and I'm really in love with it, and I'm really glad that I actually dyed up 3 skeins and keeping one for myself. So anyway, so I have 2 winners, and so this yarn will be part of it, and then other goodies. I'm not entirely sure what the rest of the prize will be, but the 2 winners are Diana, who actually asked the very last question that I answered about, you know, keeping things simple, and then Sue, who asked the picture or who asked about the beard picture. So I have both of your guys' contact information. I will contact you either on Ravelry or via email, however you said you wanted to be contacted, to get, you know, some mailing information so that I can send out some prizes to you. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again next week, again with lots of knitty stuff. I'll actually tell you about the thing that I was knitting on throughout this episode that, you know, you haven't seen before. So yeah, stay tuned for next week, and until then, make good choices. Bye.